If you're looking to one-trick one comp right now to the rank that you've always deserved, it's right now Faerie Kalista. In the new patch, this new trait of Faerie is so strong that people are gaining hundreds, not thousands of LP to climb the challenger one-tricking this comp. No matter what rank you are, from gold all the way to GM, if you want to climb, you need to know this comp. Here's the most important details in a nutshell. The most common successful way for you to get to a strong Kalista board is to play the early Faeries. Early on, you're going to play around the core of 3 Faeries and then try to build a solid frontline around it. So a lot of times you play like Bastion and maybe Rumble for like the blaster. And then when you get to level 6, you're going to be looking for things like Jax, Hecarim, Zillion, and maybe a Kali to help add in Chrono, Multi-Striker, and potentially a Warrior. When you get to Katarina, you can just splash her in as well. And if you get an opportunity to play 5 Faerie at 7, you can do that, but you only should really be doing that once you hit Rakan and Kalista, which is a little bit high roll. But you're not going to be spending that much time on 7 anyways, so a lot of times this level here on level 7 is only going to be played for like a couple of rounds at most. And then on level 8, you're going to remove these items from Tristana and Lilia onto Kalista and Rakan. And then play a core of 5 Faerie no matter what, alongside ideally Jax and Zillion, plus Hecarim. If you hit Milio, you always play Milio, but until then, you play Tristana. Once you're stable, you go to 9 and you look for the 5 cost where you either get that Milio, you have Camille replace the Jax as a 1-to-1, and then you play something like Morgana. And if you get Faerie emblems, like multiple of them, you can always just sub out all of these units for the Faerie emblems and just make sure you get 9 Faerie as soon as possible. As a general tip, you might be contested. You don't actually have to 2-star Kalista and Rakan both. If you get Rakan 2 and Kalista 1, you are quite stable. If you get Rakan 1 and Kalista 2, you're mostly stable, but you still might lose a couple of fights where Rakan dies too fast. Just make sure you have the 3 items on him. But you probably can push to 9 as well on this. If you're stuck on Rakan 1 and Kalista 1, you probably have to at least hit one of them before you move up. Or you 2-star your entire board and you have such a strong combat start that you're going to be good to go. The core 4 items you're going to be looking for are Rageblade, Warmogs, Stoneplate, and a second Rageblade. But they're very specific, so it's kind of hard to actually hit double Rageblade. Sometimes you go for 1 Rageblade and a Last Whisper, and then she ends up armor shredding for herself. Or you might go for like Red Buff or a Gunblade. And these are all okay items, but they're not as good as double Rageblade. If you do get a Radiant Rageblade, you don't need a second one because that's like having 3 Rageblades. So you might as well just go for a secondary stacking item. Rakan really likes Warmogs and Stoneplate, but if you can't get that because it requires 2 belts, you might go for Redemption instead. That ends up being quite a good replacement for Warmogs. And then you can also just flex in a bunch of different like Vest and different defensive items. So Crown Guard's fine because it scales off of HP. Steadfast Heart is also totally fine as well. And these are different ways to replace Warmogs. Stoneplate's a little bit tricky to replace, but you can also play like Protector's Vow or even Adaptive Helm. For Hecarim, he just ends up holding utility, so you'd rather put like your Last Whisper Even Shroud onto him and things like Sunfire if you need it. But remember, you do have Katarina, so you don't actually need it nearly as often. All right, I'm going to take one of my VODs and break it down because I think it's a really good example of a cookie cutter standard version of how you expect this comp's going to flow. The portal is golden finale as well, so not a lot of shenanigans. There's nothing crazy like loose subscription or crab rave or any of these like high octane portals that like give you a ton of resources that might make some exceptions. This is probably going to be the most basic version of the comp that you're going to be seeing. I start off with Poppy Pair and I buy the Witchcraft. And at this point, I still don't know if I'm going to commit to Kalista. I'm not loading into the games and saying, oh, I'm going to play a Kalista game. I'm just open to the idea of playing it. I thought about holding the Seraphine, but I chose against it because I personally want to lean into things like Warwick early because I don't have Tristana or Lilia. And I think Seraphine is a lot weaker now in the early game without easy 2 Faerie activating her trait to give her that item. I end up opening up another set of Poppy, and I think I should probably sell one of these. Oh, actually, I remember I was holding off for the possibility of Witchy Wallop. I have 4 Poppies. Let's go ahead and break things down here. 2 Tanky is an augment that I think actually I considered a lot because I do have a Ziggs pair, and I was thinking about playing 2 Tanky into Honeymancy reroll. But I think I scout around and see somebody else is playing it, and I just don't want to play contested reroll. It's just the worst feeling right now. So I don't really think that is too tanky. But I do think it's a really good augment to commit to Honeymancy if you have the start, and I have pretty good AP items for it, so it was something I was considering. Shapeshifter Crest is not very good in general because it's something that only goes with very specific compositions. If you play shapes, you kind of have to go like 6/8 shapes, and you need to build very specifically into it. I do have an Infinity Edge on the bench with Sword and a Glove, so Shapeshifter Crest actually synergizes with Varus and Smolder pretty well, and AD, so that is something I could do, but I didn't hold any Shapeshifters, and my upgraded frontline right now is Poppy, So this wouldn't be very smart since I don't have any synergy right now with my existing board. And I just don't think it's a good opener for it. Clouded Mind's actually quite good, but in my mind, I think I wasn't really committed to Kalista yet. If I was like hard forcing Kalista, I think I probably would just pick this one because it's the econ one and roll the other two and maybe look at those before I choose. But I do remember that I was thinking about trying to play too tanky. So I think I actually rolled this one. In hindsight, I probably should have just picked it up because this is an econ augment that helps me get to 8 as soon as possible and lets me hold a bunch of units that could be useful later on in the game. So I roll all 3 because I held too tanky and then saw the Honeymancy player. I got offered Scoreboard Scrapper, Fortune Favors the Bold, and Clockwork Accelerator. Scoreboard Scrapper is quite a strong combat augment for this composition in general because this composition in general really wants you to lose streak. And so Scoreboard Scrapper rewards you for that. The reason why you want to lose streak with this composition is because you kind of want specific items. You really want 2 Rage Blades, which requires very specific components. And you also really want like double belt for Rakan, maybe even more than that. So it's just very hard to get those specific components. So you want to get the carousel priority. This ends up rewarding you for doing so. It's quite good. I actually got kind of lucky because I think this is one of the strongest gold augments you can start for Kalista personally. Fortune Favors the Bold is also another econ setup, but the problem is that there's people that can just sell their entire board and you had to sell your entire board. And if you tie, you immediately cash out your Fortune Favors the Bold, and that could just end your game on the spot. So just be very careful when you take this. You have to recognize that other people might end up stopping your lose streak, and then all of a sudden your Fortune augment becomes very, very weak, and you're probably going to have way less resources than usual. But if you can find a way to get to a 10 loss with Fortune, it's still pretty good. They did nerf it very heavily in their most recent patch, but I have seen a lot of people win a lot with this augment, even post-nerf. Clockwork Accelerator is just not really acceptable right now. You really want either high econ or something that has a major payoff. And just compared to these other two, they're too weak. Maybe later in the game if I'm really desperate for combat, but at this point, not really. So I take Scoreboard Scrapper, I roll a coin flip, and I miss. I think I took a little bit too long to decide, so I end up not being able to sell the 10 immediately right here. In general, I actually believe Cassio is quite a strong 2-cost to play around for AP items, especially if I want to also hold things like Rageblade. I think if I position a little bit better, I probably could have actually killed one more unit. I have 6 poppies right here, and I think I remember making a comment that if I hit Witchy Wallop, I would have poppy 3 right here, right now, which would have been absolutely insane. I could have slammed something like Infinity Edge. So I was sort of lamenting that fact. And I think I'm going to make 10 here to make sure that I can start my economy, because as much as I want to hold things like Poppy for the chance of hitting a Poppy 3, that's just not really going to happen very often. And even if I do, I'm going to sell it later when I'm trying to play Kalista. So I just end up selling everything, I think. Now, the thing is, I did sell Tristana, so that is one thing that might be a little bit questionable. Maybe I ended up prioritizing a little bit too strong of a board, and holding Tristana might have been better. But I wanted to get, like, Ziggs 2 and the Encanter to try to kill units, because the way I view it is that I actually had the ability to go back and find Tristana later on, and I'm not trying to win streak anyways. I find a Katarina, and there's actually an argument for me to try and sell more, but I don't want to sell the 20. If I sell the 20, I have to sell like a lot more, like sell my entire backline, and I don't want to do that right now. So I instead choose to hold the Katarina and figure out that I can just kill like 1 or 2 units and preserve a lot of HP. Like, I think Ziggs Cassio is quite good early, and you notice that I'm still killing like 2 units per fight and preserving a lot of health. Fortunately, I'm still actually first pick because I'm tied in HP, so that ends up being very fortunate for me. And I get first pick and I get this bow. If I end up actually preserving too much HP, I would have lost pick priority and lost this bow, which would have been really sad. And I think if that ended up happening, I probably would have played a different comp. Like, I probably would have slammed Infinity Edge and played some other AD line. I end up using my team builder because I think in this composition, it's really easy to miss things like Jax while you're rolling down because you're really thinking about Camille. So you notice that I'm playing like 4 multi-strikers, 3 chrono. And this is because I'm going back to what I was playing with my flowchart of trying to make sure I'm playing around these units every single game. And so when I roll down, I'm going to hold Jax, but if I hit Camille, I'm just going to sell Jax and have Camille replace Jax. And that'll be my level 8 because this is 5 plus 4. So these are the core units I want to play around. I find Tristana. I look at who my next opponent is because I'm guaranteed based off my charm. I take Ziggs out because I noticed that he is a little bit weaker. And I think if I have Ziggs, and if Ziggs somehow snipes the Kog'Maw, I think I guarantee win. So I want to commit to that 5 loss. Katarina and Tristana and Cassio are just quite frankly doing a good job cleaning things up. So this ends up being a good amount of HP preservation. Notice I'm not slamming these items either because if I slam a Rage Blade, I might actually win by accident. I find a Jax and a Zillion, and I'm trying to find the best way to compromise by holding everything. And I said, hey, look, if I'm going to be committing to a 5 loss anyways. Just take out my Cassio and take out things like Ziggs and just try to play as weak of a board as possible while killing units. I queue up into a level 4 player who also is quite weak. This ends up being an interesting lobby dynamic because for a gold augment lobby start, a lot of people are actually trying to like play weaker boards to try to greed their econ. But now I'm rewarded for loose streaking. And look at that. I'm at 78 HP on 5 loss, which is actually quite good. A lot of people who are on 5 loss are usually kind of like at 69 HP, which is nice, but not really what you want because it's taking a little bit too much damage. And so now I'm actually at like an entire full life at stage 4 and 5, which is really, really big. I do slam Rageblade here because I am a coward. I want to make sure that I beat Krugs because if I lost to Krugs, I definitely would not be showing this spot to you guys. I drop some gold and I get some components and I get a Reforger, which I think is quite interesting. These components are actually quite interesting to think about because I think people might look at this and say, oh, you can slam Last Whisper because that's like another item that you can play on Kalista. Plus, most people by now who have played this set recognize that in the past, you actually slammed Rageblade and Last Whisper in tandem and then gone for the Faerie crown to try and go for the 3rd item damage amp. But I do have a Reforger, and the Reforger lets me try to play for some item combinations. And I think it's important to use a Reforger before I commit to my item slams. In this situation, I have a glove, bow, sword, and a belt. And 2 of these components, I never want to reforge. I never want to reforge bow, I never want to reforge belt. And so it comes down to whether or not I want to reforge the sword or the glove. In these kinds of spots, you have to think about what happens in the worst case scenario. If I reforge a glove and I get a worst case scenario where I get an unslammable item of some sort, like I don't get a rod, I don't get another belt, I don't get another tier or something like that. Instead, I get like a vest. What am I going to do? I get a sword and a bow, which makes a giant slayer. I don't want that. If I get a sword and a belt, that's a Sterex gauge. I don't want that. And if it's a vest, like I said before, it ends up being Edge of Night, which I don't want either. If I reforge the sword and the worst case scenario happens where, let's say, I get like another glove or the vest that I was talking about, I have Last Whisper, which is actually not that bad of a slam and something that most people would do anyways. And that gives me a guarantee of a backup in case anything goes wrong. And as we talked about before, sword is actually not that valuable because while you could make sword items for units like Katarina or maybe even put it on another unit like Camille later on, it's just so far away. And so if I reforge the sword, I actually have a lot of hits. Another belt makes Warmogs, a rod makes a Rageblade, a tier makes a Redemption. And if I get another glove, I can just make a Thief's Gloves and then just play around the belt and the bow for the rest of the stage. So, and if I get another glove, I can get a Thief's Gloves and I can just play around the bow or the belt off the carousel and complete whatever item comes my way there. And so there's actually a lot of optionality by reforging the sword. So that's what I end up choosing to do here. So I get really lucky and I get another belt. So I have Warmogs now, and that's a very high roll. And now I also have a Lilia. So everything comes together and I am playing a 3 Faerie with Rageblade. I actually don't like the fact that I'm slamming my items here because I think I might win by accident. This person is clearly trying to loose streak, and I have too much HP on my board now, and I also slammed the crown onto Tristana. This is something I should have done after the fight had started to recognize that, yeah, this is just bad. Don't worry about that. But, like, I snapped my loose streak. Oh, well. I mean, that's part of, I guess, the dynamic nature of loose streaking. Sometimes you're just wrong on it. Don't do that. Just slam items only if you know you're going to lose to try to pick things up. I think it's just because I was used to losing, so I was kind of autopiloting there. Taking a look at my augments here at 3-2. Teaming up is actually an augment you don't really want very often because you just kind of don't need the extra component. The value of teaming up is just giving you gold and the component, and I don't really need that. Exiles is fantastic with this composition because Exiles gives you max HP shield, and Fairies have a lot of max HP. Plus, you kind of want a solo frontline Rakan, and so spacing him out and making him be the person getting focus fired is really powerful. So Exiles is actually one of the best combo silvers you can possibly have. Restart Mission is actually quite good as well, and I think this is another really good silver for the composition because even though I sell my Tristana and my Lilia and my Katarina, I get so many other units that I can sell for later as well for gold. And I'm not playing many 2-star units except for Poppy. So this is actually just straight up a net amount of gold. And I have a high ability to high roll like maybe a Tristana 2 with my 2-star or maybe a Jax and Lilia, like things like that. But I do think that I'm trying to lose. And even though I won that previous fight, I still kind of want to maintain my lose streak. So I think the restart mission is a little bit weaker than usual. I think it's actually quite solid if I didn't have scoreboard scrapper and I need something else to kind of save my game. So I think it's mainly Exiles, but I do think Restart Mission is actually quite viable here. I roll 1 and 3. Branching out is not really a serious contention. Like, if you are picking branching out, you were either trying to farm content or maybe you took flexible as your first augment. Just not really serious. Placebow is also very similar to Restart Mission. It's like econ facing, and 15 gold is quite good if I needed it because let's say I was contested. And I do think one other person is playing close in the lobby, so I am contested. But overall, like, I don't think that Placebow is strong enough to replace Exiles, so I'm going to take Exiles here. But if I was in a situation where maybe there's 3 people playing Kalista, and also I needed to, like, roll way earlier than everyone else, I'd probably consider taking this one instead. I ended up making a Zillion 2 and leveling and playing around Exiles. One thing that I could do here, if I'm paying attention, but I'm not, is removing this crown from Tristana. If you bench this Tristana, the crown comes off, and you can evaluate if you want to slam it, so that way your board naturally improves if you need it. Because if you keep the crown on your Tristana Frodan, you might accidentally win again. And I was not paying attention. I was clearly alt-tabbing and trying to justify my pick over something like Restart Mission, and I won! And I won by a small margin. I'm pretty sure this crown has something to do with it, so a little bit unfortunate, and that's okay. That's actually not that big of a deal to actually win here because I'm still getting scoreboard scrapper value. In the end, the reason why you want to lose is because you want to keep maintaining scoreboard scrapper value by being in the bottom 4 and getting permanent AD AP scaling. So a little bit unfortunate about that, but it's okay. The only thing that's kind of awkward is that I'm at 70 HP because I preserved so much HP on stage 2, and 4th place is actually at 80 HP. So I want to be careful and not actually win my next fight for sure, because otherwise I will potentially start losing stacks on Scoreboard Scrapper, which can be devastating for my late game scaling. But thankfully, I do see that my matchmaking is good enough, and I end up losing and getting first pick. And I'm looking for a rod to complete for my second Rage Blade, which ends up being the highest priority, and I get double Rage Blade. So everything kind of worked out. My Reforge for sword into a frontline item, and my double Rage Blade, so that way I can get the double offensive items. So my Kalista is ready to go, and now I'm only 1 item away to finish my Rakan. I roll my shot for free with a charm, but I don't see anything here. And I slam double Rage Blade, and again, like small little mistakes here, but you know, it's one of those things that's compounding because I'm not paying attention. But I don't need to slam Rage Blade unless I know that I need to in order to preserve HP. I scout around and there's a good amount of Faerie players, and it looks like this person who went for Rune's Hurricane has the Jinx, so I'm not really stressed about, you know, them taking the Kalistas and Rakans. And then over these next 2 fights, I'm just going to be looking at trying to take the best possible loss and get ready for my fast 8. All right, in this fight, it looks like I win again. And again, I'm not really used to being this strong with just on a 1, but hey, goes to show you that Exile Scoreboard Scrapper combo is pretty deadly, so in hindsight, I don't think I played this stage the cleanest, but that's okay because I'm at level 7, 58 gold. I have a decent amount of HP. I'm still getting scoreboard scrappers value, so not the end of the world. But as I rank up, I can't be afforded making these kinds of mistakes. I get dropped a Hecarim pair to play around, and that is something to hold on to as well. One thing that I also forgot to mention is that I actually item remove off my Tristana, because in the case where I get a Kalista, I get to hold on to that item remover and have more options to it. In general, at the end of the stage, you get a guaranteed new item magnetic remover if you don't have one on your bench. So you might as well use it, so that way you have more options. Just a silly min-max, but hey, if we're here to improve at the game, you need to do all those small things to give yourself every possible out. Looks like I'm going to take another narrow loss, and that's actually a really good loss, so I kind of maintain my bot 4 position. Let's take a look at my 4-2 augments and break it down. Combat Caster is not really an augment that synergizes that well with Kalista and Rakan, because you're not like spam casting nearly as much. This is really good in like Scholars or other like comps that are able to benefit from casting a lot. And it's not necessarily that Rakan and Kalista don't benefit from it as much, it's that it's not as insane in this composition as it would be in others. Teaming up is also a lot more awkward because support items tend to work off of adjacent allies, and I have Exiles. So you have to be really careful not to take it, because if I get like a Locket, I can't really get as much value off of it unless I want to give up Exiles. And so there's a little bit of anti-synergy there. And then Rejuvenation, I'm not even necessarily trying to do that because I have Exiles, but even if I did, I want a solo frontline Rakan. And it's not really about the Omnivamp on Rakan. It's really about the tankiness and the damage dealt by Kalista. I roll all 3 and I get offered Item Collector, Vertically Inclined, and Support Golem. Support Golem doesn't make sense again for the same reasons I talked about. It's one of the best augments you can actually have in general for almost any composition, generically speaking. But again, the support item doesn't really synergize with Exiles. Vertically Inclined is also surprisingly not as effective because you actually splash a ton of random traits. You get things like Chrono and Preserver and Multi-Striker, and you actually build like a decent vertical. Vertically Inclined is a lot more for like if you just play, say, a Galio hero augment and Warwick reroll, you get 6 Vanguard and that's it. That's more often when you play things like Vertically Inclined, when you only have like 1 or 2 traits active. We're probably going to have like 5 or more, so it's not actually that good. Meanwhile, Item Collector did get nerfed, but it's because it's one of those augments that scales as the game goes on, so Item Collector is actually best at 4-2. I will say there's a downside. I slammed 2 Rage Blades, and the important thing about Item Collector is it's for each unique item that you're holding, so it's a little bit worse than usual. That being said, I am a comp that's playing for the late game, and I feel like at this point, all that's standing in the way of me winning the game is just making sure that when I hit Kalista and Rakan, I am very, very strong. So I think Item Collector here, even though it's a little bit weaker than usual because of my double Rage Blade, I'm more than okay picking it and trying to collect a lot of value. All right, so I pick up 1 Kalista immediately on my natural. I'm going to go ahead and roll down. And I'm looking for econ charms, so I think people would probably look at things like Sticky Fingers and like, oh, it has value with Item Collector, but remember that even though it does have synergy with like what I'm trying to go for, and ultimately you do end up getting Sticky Fingers value by killing frontline units a lot of times, I really want to make sure that I hit Kalista and Rakan, and you don't need that many items in general for the composition to succeed. So this is too expensive. 6 gold for a charm here is too much. Looks like I do take the target dummies, and target dummies give me Exiles value, and I do not have Rakan. I only have 1 Kalista. I don't even have a holder of my Queensguard armor. I need to remove off of Tristana. I need to do a lot of things in 1 turn. And I took out 5 Faerie, which I don't think is exactly the best move. So a little bit of a panic of a roll down. I thought I had 5 Faerie in, but even then, I don't have like a good holder of it. This person has the right idea. They are contesting me. They took Faerie +1. They have Katarina holding the items. But you can see the difference, by the way, as we take a look and rewind, that this person's playing Last Whisper and not Rage Blade. And you can see how they have Katarina 2, they have 5 Faerie, they have Keepers, they have like combat and everything, and a Faerie +1. But my double Rage Blade Kalista is just outscaling them way too fast. Okay, it's a new round. I think I'm looking at 5 Faerie at this point and thinking about whether or not I actually want to try and tank a little bit more because the 5 Faerie is better HP. But I'll be honest, this is like looking a little bit awkward, and I think I probably should end up just selling for 10 gold here to try and make sure I maximize my econ. So the 3 Bastion, definitely not efficient. I really wanted the Chrono as well, and I recognize that this is probably not the right board, so I think I made a mistake here. I am at 45 HP, so I'm actually top 4 right now. And so I don't get the stocking bonus anymore from Scoreboard Scrapper, but I do end up getting a bonus HP. I'm at last pick on Carousel, and I could go for a Cloak for a Stone Plate, but I already have Steadfast Heart. So even if I make Stone Plate, where do I put all these other items? I probably end up just stacking Rakan, and then I have a Stone Plate, or maybe I have a random Stone Plate, or maybe I have a random Steadfast Heart that's not going to go anywhere. So I end up just not committing to that and taking a belt for maximum amount of gold. And because I can't really figure out a really good 5 Faerie board, I'm just going to go ahead and flex a little bit by going down from 5 Faerie to 3 and playing 2 more Bastion because I have a Taric pair. And so Taric pair should theoretically be something that I lean into because if I hit Taric 2, that is a way that I can replace Rakan 2 if I never hit Rakan. And so this is like one of the ways that I can show you of how to play around some of your other traits if you are contested because things are not ideal. I'm not hitting the Rakan. I'm not hitting Kalista 2. I don't even have 5 Faerie in, but I'm trying to make the best of the situation in the spot where I'm very contested right now. Right now, I'm just doing like some generic swaps, keep myself a little bit unpredictable. Just most important thing, keep Kalista safe away from enemy carries and try my best to let her scale and let the fight drag on. Taric's kind of doing a good job. And I think if I were to also continue nitpick, I think that I could probably put extra items onto Taric, like maybe an extra belt, and that helps scale him. So that way I can remove that later on. Like, there's no way that he's getting a Queensguard armor. I'm itemizing him as if he needs the item slot in case I hit 5 Faerie, but that's never going to happen. So you could always, like, you know, nitpick and try to slam more items onto him. I do find a Kalista pair, and I am probably going to commit to another roll down here. I think about Salvager here, but I pretty much have, like, the right items I want anyways, so this is pretty useless to me. I do have that open belt that I took for Even Shroud, so I can try and go for armor reduction now. and I high roll and I hit a Milio. I take a champion duplicator because that means that in the worst case scenario that I can go for a Kalista 2. So that is big. And Milio is very huge, but once more, I do not have Faerie in. And in fact, I have Faerie on my bench. My Even Shroud is away from my Kalista. And in general, this turn is not the cleanest. I might end up losing a fight because of this. But it looks like the Kalista 2 duplicator is actually super huge, so that was very clutch. Okay, I get a Major Wish, so I think this is always like fine to take because it could be like really powerful amount of gold or maybe like a really strong item. In this case, I get Gem. I end up repositioning so I can get my Hecarim next to my Kalista. So basically, whoever's Kalista attacking is constantly getting their armor reduced. That was definitely a fix of my positioning. And I'm still not there yet. You know, I'm not playing the Rakan, and I still have no semblance of hitting a Rakan anytime soon. But I think I've done a good job fighting for my HP, and now I'm still top 4. I find a Milio pair, kind of like wishing maybe I just rolled and hit close to 2. I could use my duplicator on something else, like a Milio 2. There's an Assassin Camille that you have to be very careful about. If it's shaded like this, that means that she's going to jump straight to the back line. So I have to be very careful about that. But the difficulty is that all you have to do is just move 1 unit, and you kind of have to move like a lot. So I'm keeping tabs on my enemy. And so you can see that this Camille that I was waiting for the whole time, I'm going to sacrifice this Milio. Hopefully Milio casts once. He does, and he gives his items, and he dies. So I think that ends up being a very successful swap. So just be very, very careful about that kind of stuff, because if you lose your Kalista, you will lose the fight. Okay, I ended up losing the fight anyways. But I would have lost by more units. So really important to try to preserve that amount of HP. Because if I end up like losing by more, maybe I'm at 17, 16, that's like a danger zone. And remember, going back to the 8 to 9 HP I saved early, that could be really clutch as well. I go for any item here. It looks like I get Stone Plate here. That's the only thing that's pickable because I'm not looking for an emblem. Looks like the player that died did have Preservers, so I roll, and I finally find Rakan at 5-5. I also have a Temporary Thieves Gloves, and I buy a unit to check what the items will be because it's going to stay static. And I decided to just put it onto Milio because Last Whisper is better on the back line. I end up removing these items off of a Morgana, and I'm just gonna play 3-item and Hecarim for now. And it's actually kind of good because it ends up being like items that he can use. Like, he doesn't mind Titans, it's actually quite solid on him, and Steadfast Heart is just like another way to keep my Even Shroud alive. So now I have my Rakan 1 and my Kalista 2, and I think I'm finding clear to go to level 9 now. I see all 4s in my shop here as a charm. I probably should click that to see if I hit Rakan, but I am not. I also end up replacing the Zilean with Morgana. I think this is a little bit more of a debatable point because I lose Chrono, but the benefit of it is that I get Morgana, which is generally a very solid frontliner and helps support the Rakan really well. But in some matchups, Zilean might even be better because he might freeze like a really important unit and stall for enough time for Kalista Rakan to deal the damage. And just look at how much damage this Rakan is taking, right? Like, I stall so long, Rakan never even dies. It's just Rakan 1. And because of the way I also played around removers and like try to manipulate how often I'm getting the item removers, I was able to eventually get to Bis Rakan anyways, even though I slammed Steadfast Heart like, 2 stages ago. So I'm here. I'm very likely at top 4, and I'm just thinking about how I can get to 9 to try to add in this Zilean and then look for Camille. Looking at my items, this is actually a little bit awkward because I don't need anti-heal because I technically have Kettering that wounds, and I don't need Last Whisper because I have Even Shroud, and I don't need a Steadfast Heart because I already have one, and so it's like worse for item collector. But Deathblade is really an item purely for Kalista, so I'm like, what should I even take here? And I think I end up concluding that I'd rather just have a good item for Milio than anything else, because Milio ends up giving me more items on everybody else. So I believe I take Rageblade and I slam it on Milio. And I think this is me deliberately choosing to sack my item collector instead. I leveled to 9 because I'm at 21 HP, and I think leveling to 9 for a Chrono and 3 Preserver is worth it as opposed to waiting 1 and buying Treasure Party. You could debate that I could take Treasure Party and try to sack 1 round, but I actually care about having 21 HP and having 2 lives guaranteed. If I lose at 21, I'm going to go down to like 9 HP, and that means I can't lose for the rest of the game. And I want to have a little bit of that flexibility at least. I buy target dummies, and I want these target dummies to bait the Vhagar, because I want Vhagar to use all of his burst on it. I end up messing my exile positioning on Katarina and Lilia though, so got a little dizzy. I should have just forgotten about the exile's value on the dummies. That's my bad. But I think overall that's like really smart because Vhagar uses the first half of his burst on 2 target dummies that do not matter, and that guy ends up dying. All right, I restored my Exile's positioning, and I'm just taking every charm I can at this point. I don't really get to be very picky about it since I'm at low gold count, and I'm just trying to steal the game. I'm trying to also figure out a way to get maximum Exile's value while having Rakan solo frontline, because I really wanted to take a bunch of early aggro as opposed to like spreading out my frontline. So I'm trying to play like solo frontline while second rowing everything else with Exiles. It's really complicated. This guy is looking really strong with 6 chrono. And I don't think I can win this without Rakan 2. Oh, wait. Hold on. I forgot. I'm playing the most broken comp in the game. Never mind. I win. I guess I'm a beast. This person is playing Honeymancy. This is a Ziggs reroll, and this is a Milio too. So I had to do something kind of unsightly. I had to take and deny this guy's Honeymancy, and I think he was playing the 2 tanky Honeymancy reroll. So I'm really sorry to Pokemon Go superfan, but it is what it is. So that's Milio 2 for me. And hey, I guess Honeymancy emblem technically buffs item collector, and I deny my opponent's Honeymancy. So listen, being honorable doesn't gain you LP. So you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. And this guy ends up trying to cap around 0-2, but looks like me denying the Honeymancy emblem on him, which is really huge because he had 2 tanky and BS friends. That ends up being a really clutch factor in this game. Also, one thing to note is that I'm trying to position Kalista away from Ziggs. Ziggs is aiming at the corners, so I try to put things like Zillion in the corner now to try to bait some of that damage and then not let Kalista get sniped. Remember, Kalista is the team, so if she gets assassinated in any kind of capacity, you have no more damage, so I have to protect her at all costs. This next fight is still on Rakan 1, by the way. I kind of realized that I'm still doing this all on Rakan 1, and you know how I was saying, like, Kalista 2, Rakan 1 is mostly stable. It looks very stable when you have things like Item Collector, Scoreboard Scrapper, and Exiles as triple combat to help make really tanky. And I think you guys are starting to see like why this composition is not okay. I think a lot of people are recognizing that Rakan 1 is way too stable if you get Biz on him, and it is disgusting if you can get it all online. Pretty much just a formality at this point. I'm going to pop and probably look for a Morgana or Milio item. I'm going to roll down for Morgana 2. And that should be it if I'm able to hit. This is actually a fancy move I'm about to do to show you guys, but Suspicious Trenchcoat and Unstable Treasure Chest actually is a hidden rule. The first rule is that it's always going to be likely to hit on a melee unit. The melee units on my board that I can hit are Lilia, Katarina, and Camille. So if I click this right here, right now, it would give 1 to one of these 3. The second rule that they don't tell you is that you can actually manipulate this to guarantee it onto units by benching it. So if I bench Katarina, for example, I guarantee get it on these 2 units because they're the only 2 melee units that are around that don't have an item. And so therefore I'll be able to get the Suspicious Trenchcoat there. But there's also a third thing that I'm going to incorporate, which is I remove this Honeymancy emblem, and that guarantees that I can get the Suspicious Trenchcoat onto Morgana by taking out every other melee unit and only having Morgana on my board. And so I'm going to remove this Honeymancy emblem, take off the 3 melee units, click Suspicious Trenchcoat, although I kind of forgot that there's 2, so I get 1 onto the Zillion. In hindsight, I probably wish I should have done that onto Katarina or Lilia, but that's a way that I can guarantee it. I roll, I hit Morgana 2, I upgrade her, and I can now go for Suspicious Trenchcoat with a vow to try to end the game here and have Milio grant her another item to combo and do a big wombo combo of Morgana 2, Suspicious Trenchcoat, spawn with extra vows, and cast and try to end the game here. One thing to note is that you do need at least 5 units for that Suspicious Trenchcoat trick to work. If you have less than 4 units on the board, it's not going to actually work. So there you have it. How to one-trick Kalista all the way up to Challenger even. I think if you truly master this comp, you can climb as high as you want. The only thing about it is that you are contested, so it can be tricky at times, but hopefully I showed you a couple ways to think creatively about not necessarily always just playing the 5 Faerie or maybe finding other tanks if you can't find Rakan. I will say if you don't find a single Kalista, it can be tough. You might have to carry Tristana 2 for a while, but hopefully you don't encounter that and you just hit 1 Kalista eventually. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in Challenger.